Hello everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Carter Burwell. Over the course of his career, which spans more than 3 decades, Carter Burwell has written the music for more than 90 movies. He has proved over and over again that he is one of the most versatile composers working in the industry, showcasing his gift for melody and dramatic instincts. Throughout his career, he has formed lasting work relationships with major directors such as Joel and Ethan Coen, Michael Caton-Jones, and Spike Jonze. His massive list of credits includes Blood Simple, Miller's Crossing, Fargo, The Big Lebowski, This Boy's Life, Conspiracy Theory, The Jackal, Rob Roy, No Country for Old Men, Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, and many more. Most recently, he once again teamed up with the Coen Brothers on the Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which we will also discuss in detail. Welcome.
Thank you.
You have had a very long and distinguished career. In 1984, you had scored your first film, directed by the Coens, which was called Blood Simple. Could you tell me a little bit how you started out in the film industry and how you got involved with the Coens?
Sure. It was never a goal of mine to be doing what I'm doing now, but I was playing in bands in New York City just for fun back in the '80s, and they hired as their sound editor on Blood Simple a guy named Skip Leavesay that I knew through that scene. He knew some of the other musicians I played with, and we knew each other as musicians, really. I guess that I knew he worked in film, but I didn't know much about it. Anyway, Joel and Ethan asked him if he knew someone who would be willing to do the music for Blood Simple, do it for free, and might be the right composer for it. And Skip seemed to think that I would get along well with them, and he put us together.
Great. The Coens seem to be very hands-on filmmakers. I mean, they not only produce and direct, but they also write screenplays and they edit. How do they approach music in their films?
Well, it varies a great deal from film to film. They've written films that are essentially about music, like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, or Inside Llewyn Davis, where the songs are part of the script, and in those cases, especially Inside Llewyn Davis, I didn't actually contribute anything to that film because it's so completely, the musical choices are so completely made before the film was even shot. But then there are times also when they don't know at all what they want to do, like Fargo, and in those cases, I'm left to my own devices, I guess you could say, to come up with ideas and an approach. So it really varies enormously from their having very clear ideas to their having no ideas at all.
I mean, you collaborated with them about 15 times, if I'm not mistaken, and one of your earliest movies with them was Miller's Crossing, one of my favorite movies in the gangster genre. A movie for which you had written and arranged this beautiful theme, which is also based on the Irish folk ballad called Lament for Limerick. Why did you pick this piece as a source of inspiration?
Well, that was a film, for instance, which Joel and Ethan, what they knew they wanted was an orchestral score, but they didn't know what kind of a score. I think they imagined it would be probably sort of like a film noir, but they didn't really specify that to me. When I first saw the film without any music, I felt that it was so cold and violent that it would be kind of interesting if the music were the opposite. If Gabriel Byrne's character, who's the lead in the film, he never betrays the reasons that he's doing the things he's doing, and his actions really guide the entire plot. But he never tells you why. He never tells anyone why, and he has this sort of stone face. And I thought, well, if I played music that was actually sort of sentimental Irish music, we might suspect that his motivations are his love for Albert Finney, who's his boss, the boss of his Irish crime gang. So that was my concept, and I sort of proposed it to Joel and Ethan the way I just said it to you. It's just a concept. and they were not taken with the idea really, because it was going to change. It was going to change the film to put sort of sentimental music against it. But what I did was I went out and looked for recognizably Irish tunes, because that's the idea, is that he's in an Irish crime gang, and the music had to be recognizably Irish. And I found that particular one that seemed very promising. See, I could imagine doing an orchestral rendition of that piece, and I basically put together a little mock-up with synthesizers of what I might do, like oboe playing the main melody surrounded by strings, and I put it against one scene and played it for Joel and Ethan, and they immediately got it. They got what I was after, and they said, "Yep, great, do it." So that was basically where that came from. I'm skipping over the whole part where I knew nothing about orchestral music at that point. I'm not trained as a composer, but while they were out shooting the film, I just tried to learn everything I could about the orchestra and about arranging for it. So that was, I love it when my job involves research and when I can feel like I'm smarter at the end of a film than I was at the beginning, and that was definitely one of those cases.
I mean, you collaborated on so many movies like Fargo and, Miller's Crossing. Could you walk me through the spotting process of those films? I mean, those movies have a big, strong musical language, but the music is never overbearing. I never feel that there's too much music in a film. How do you decide which scenes need score and which don't?
Well, I would have to say with Joel and Ethan's films, you could usually pretty well tell from reading the script, even though it doesn't say anything about music. They do write in such a way that you can sort of see where music's going to go. Like most of their films have at some point a montage or two where there's no dialogue for several minutes, and clearly those scenes are there to be accompanied by music. And because they're genre filmmakers, they work in genres like the Western or the crime drama or things like this. In some ways, the structure of their films is often a little bit old-fashioned. You read their script and you just sort of know where music goes. Then they do films that are not that way. No Country for Old Men is an example, or Barton Fink even, and you really don't know where music's going to go. And for those, the spotting session takes longer and is more fractious. But ever since Barton Fink, one of the things we've done is to have Skip Leasay, their sound designer, present during the spotting, so that when we go through it, I get to hear what his ideas are. At the same time, he gets to hear my ideas. And it's very logical, but in fact, most films are not spotted that way. Most films, the composer is there with the director and the editor, and the composer never finds out what the actual sound effects are going to be like until the final mix. And sometimes the sound effects are fighting with the music. But ever since Barton Fink, which is very much a film where the mix is very focused on the sound effects, we've always been spotting the films together. So we have a good deep discussion about what the actual sound of the film is going to be at the end when we're doing that.
I mean, you've shown great versatility, scoring in different genres. How do you manage to come up with a fresh voice for each project?
Well, I laugh because, of course, I want to come up with a fresh voice for each project. But yeah, it's sometimes I'm more successful at other times. It's that is my goal. I have to say that we work on limited schedules. I typically have maybe 6 weeks to write a film score, and sometimes less and sometimes more. But that's probably about average. So that you have a certain amount of time to spend experimenting, searching for a unique voice, and then at a certain point, whether you found one or not, you have to actually start writing the score. So I try to do what you've described. In my dreams, every film would be its own world, and it wouldn't sound like another film, and it would be unique. But there are also the realities of the schedule. So sometimes I'm more successful at that than others. But definitely I try to do that. So I would say my first step on any film is usually to ask myself what the music can bring to the film that isn't already there. And I think that helps to view it from that perspective. I think some film viewers imagine that what the composer is doing is watches the film and thinks of music that will go with what has been shot. I actually kind of take the opposite view, and instead of working off of what's been shot, I try to think, well, what's missing that the music can bring? And I already told you the story of Miller's Crossing. I felt there was something missing there. But for every film, I try to come up with some concept like that and let that guide me.
I mean, you've worked with all kinds of directors, also Michael Caton Jones and James Foley. Have you developed a certain approach as to how to deal with different directors? Do you have a formula?
Well, my formula really is to try to go with the director's vision and try to work with the director the way the director wants to work. So that's easy to say. It's not always easy to do because, of course, yes, if left to my own devices, I have my own way of doing things. I'm very methodical, and I have my own approach. But when I'm working with a new director and they maybe are completely unlike me, let's say that they prefer chaos to order. I'm a very orderly person. I'm a director who prefers chaos. I'll say, well, okay, I'm going to try to put my method aside and try to do it the way the director wants to do it, because that way maybe I'll come up with something new that I wouldn't have thought of. Maybe that's the world the film lives in, and in a more chaotic world, for instance, and maybe that's the right approach. So that's what I try to do, is say, okay, I'm put aside my own approaches and try to work with the director the way that they want to approach it. And sometimes that doesn't succeed. Sometimes the director's view or way of working is so alien to mine that we actually end up not being able to collaborate. But that's what I attempt to do.
Having just mentioned Michael Caton Jones, so one of my favorite movies is This Boy's Life, this great coming-of-age story starring Robert De Niro, Leonardo DiCaprio, a very emotional story which also required a touching score. How did you figure out how to underscore the emotion and the drama of this film?
Well, I tried in that case to I guess you could say to not be over, just definitely not to sentimentalize it. I'll say that. And I think I try to be a little restrained with the emotion, because the situation that the boy is in is told, of course, from the boy, who's played by Leonardo DiCaprio. It's told from the boy's point of view. He's a teenager, and he's in very difficult, you'd have to say, difficult or challenging circumstances. The life he leads with his mom. But the way he gets through is by, he doesn't express how he feels about things. He deals with it the way a teenage boy typically does. He acts out and stresses his mother out, anyway, I tried with the music to be true to that character. So I tried really to keep the music. There's a tenderness, I think, always in that score, but I tried not to let the emotion get carried away with, because the story is so how shall I put it? There's this constant threat that things are going to fall apart in his life, and they're always so close to doing that I wanted to withhold a little bit of that emotional information from the audience, if that makes sense, so they could feel a little of that uncertainty as to what direction this is going to go, and if the boy and his mom are going to make it through the situations they're in.
The score, unfortunately, has not been properly released. Do you know if there have been any talks about a decent release so fans can finally hear the complete project?
Well, I'm not aware there have been talks, and basically this is the way that works in terms of finances is that if the film was recorded using the American Musicians Union, called the AFM, that if you're going to take a film score and put it on a record, those musicians have to get paid again. That's called new use fees. So the music is now being used for a new use on the soundtrack album. And they get paid about half what they did originally when a soundtrack album comes out. And if it's a really low-budget film, it can be less. But This Boy's Life was not, I don't think, a especially low-budget film. So it means that it's a little bit expensive for someone to put out. I'd love it if someone would, and maybe someone would take one cut from that and put it out on a compilation or something like that. But it can't. It's a little more complicated than you might think to put out.
Oh yes.
Soundtracks that have been recorded with the union, and I'd love it if someone would, but I'm not holding my breath.
I would love to hear the complete recording of that one, especially the the main theme is very let's say touching. Also the music you wrote for the end credits is really a beautiful piece of music here. As a composer and storyteller, do you feel the need to get inside the characters, or do you try to absorb the story at first?
Well, it varies. I wouldn't say that I necessarily feel the need to be inside the characters, but I do need to be, as you might say, yes, inside the story. I need to have a good grasp of what the story means in particular, and because by doing that I can then accentuate things and bring things out that maybe aren't always obvious on screen. So that's usually my approach, is to say, well, given this story, I think here's an aspect that could be maybe played that or played down. Maybe we don't need to see this so much. It's a romance. Maybe and the characters are completely demonstrative in their love for each other. Maybe we don't need to play that so much because we see it. Whereas in a film, so like Carol, which I did, the characters are not allowed to be demonstrative at all about their feelings, and there the music actually has to carry a lot of the romantic expression because of that. So it's I don't think I so much inhabit the character as, but I do have to really live inside that story. That's absolutely true.
Working on a movie usually bears many challenges, and you also have to deal with many personalities. Throughout your career, have there been any moments when you had to rewrite a score at the 11th hour?
Oh, yeah. Well, yes. I forget who said it. It might have been Jerry Goldsmith. But yeah, if you haven't had your score thrown out, you haven't really been a professional film composer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had to rewrite mine, and I've had sometimes I've worked on, been most of the way through a score and then had it thrown out, and then I try to start over, which it's complicated because once you've found an idea and to write, I really have to sort of feel the music intuitively. It's really sort of like being in love. I have to have an emotional relationship with the music, with the themes, and as we were saying in the last question, I have to live in it. And then when someone throws it out, it's like that's the end of a relationship, and now I have to quickly fall in love again and quickly, get another score written. It's sometimes it's just impossible, and sometimes I have to say to someone, well, if you really don't like what we're doing, you're probably better off just hiring someone else, because I don't think I can reimagine this entire film from scratch. That does happen, and I've also been hired to sometimes take over a film that someone else has already scored, and they've thrown out that score. These are all painful stories, obviously.
Yeah, I bet so.
But it happens, yes. It does. It happens to everybody.
Okay, Carter, and I would say let's dive right into the Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which is the latest movie which you have collaborated on with the Coen Brothers, a Western anthology. And could you tell me a bit about the development of the project and how you and the Coens worked on this particular film?
Sure. This is Joel and Ethan told me years ago, it must have been around the early 2000s, that they had some short scripts, there were scripts for short films that they had written that they didn't think would probably ever get made. We were probably, when we were talking about, maybe we were talking about True Grit or something. Anyway, they told me they had written these short westerns, and they had a few of them. I think they even had a deal at one point, maybe with HBO, that if they had some free time, maybe they could shoot these short films, and HBO would put them on. But I think Joel and Ethan didn't think it was likely these would ever really get made. Then, I guess a little more than a year ago, they told me that they were going to shoot all 6 of these. The 6th one didn't actually exist at that point, but they were going to shoot 6 short films, these short westerns, and then they gave me the scripts as they existed then. There was 5 of them, and then just before they went to shoot, they gave me the 6th script. And we talked a little bit about what the music would be. As we tend to do before they go away to shoot, we just have the briefest conversation where, we each of us throws out a sentence about each of the films, and that's about it usually. With regard to Buster Scruggs, the big question wasn't so much the individual films, but was how would they all be tied together? Would there be something in the music that would tie them together so that they were somehow one film or one theme, something. We didn't know what that would be. We talked about different ways you might do that, but after they shot the film, which is usually when I start really writing it, we can talk all we want, but until I see it, see what it looks like, see the pacing, the editing, and things like this, I don't usually start to actually write the music. So when I saw it, they had come back from the shoot determined that it should somehow be all tied together into one film, determined that it shouldn't be possible to separate it into 6 short films. And they thought music was the way to do this, but I must say I worked at that challenge for quite a while, for a month anyway. And each of the 6 stories is so different. By design, they're so different. They have no characters in common, no storylines in common. And the way they shot them, they even look very different. The color is different, the camera positions, the editing. I just couldn't find any musical idea that could work in all 6 of them. So I beat my head against the wall on that challenge, and in the end kind of failed. But in the absence of an overall theme, what I did was have one theme that plays at the very, very beginning and very end of the movie to sort of bookend it.
Yes.
Based on this folk song, "The Unfortunate Lad," and then in between each story, the music sort of leads you into the next story. So that was my way of at least creating some glue that helped hold it together.
One of the 6 episodes of the film, The Gal Who Got Rattled, had been described by the Coens as very demanding and challenging. Did you feel the same challenge when you had to score it?
Well, I mean, for them it was challenging because they were in the plains of Nebraska, far away from from a hotel or anything like this, with a wagon train with oxen leading it. So, yeah, in terms of production, that one was definitely very challenging for them. I didn't have to face that, and that one was it's challenging because it's probably got more score than most of the other stories. It's more of a traditional Western in terms of its structure and its storyline. There are, even though each of these stories is not that long, each film is probably 20, 25 minutes.
Yeah.
So that means there's never like a 5-minute montage in the middle of that film. But this one does have quite a few visual montages, even if maybe they're only a minute and a half long or 2 minutes, but quite a few sections where there's no dialogue and you just see this beautiful landscape with the sun setting behind a wagon train. And the music has to keep you moving through this, moving as this relationship develops in the story. So that was challenging, but also very satisfying, because when the film depends as much on music as that one does, it's very satisfying to a composer.
Right. You had recorded the music and conducted the music at Abbey Road Studios in London, one of the most famous and special recording facilities in the world. What was your experience like working there?
Well, I've worked there many times, and
Yeah.
it's always wonderful. It's a fantastic studio. I mean, I don't know any better studio in the world, and the musicians I know very well by now, most of them, because again, we've done many projects together. So even though I live in New York, going to London and working at Abbey Road it feels like I'm home, honestly. So it's always enjoyable. In this case, it seems a little ironic that to record the music for a Western, I had to go to London, but that's what I had to do.
And you had also used a choir for the score. Did you record this live with the orchestra, or was it recorded individually and then mixed into the orchestral piece?
No, we overdubbed the choir. We worked actually in Studio 2 at Abbey Road, which is the studio that the Beatles used. So yeah, the room is not a big orchestral room, and to record, like, for instance, strings, woodwinds, brass, and choir, which is what we had, and percussion, you do end up having to do it in separate passes. So we did the brass separately, the percussion separately, and the choir separately.
Did you feel that this film posed any particular challenges which you had never experienced before in terms of recording and writing?
Well, it's a fairly unique film in that it's made of 6 films, right? So
Yeah.
that does present special challenges. I basically had to write 6 scores. Not really 6, because the first story is driven by songs, not so much by score. But I did have to basically score 5 films and then also tie it all together. So I had to do that, but basically in the same time and budget as you spend on one film. So I think for all of us, I think I can safely say it's true for Joel and Ethan too, it was more complicated than we imagined. We sort of blithely thought, well, they're each short films and they've got their own, look and feel, and that'll be fun, won't it? And we didn't really appreciate that it would actually take much longer than we thought, because of the fact that it's 6 separate stories and 6 separate films.
Several songs had also been used throughout the film, such as Cool Water, performed by Tim Nelson, or Carefree Drifter. Did you also get to pick the songs, or did the Coens have these particular songs in mind already when they had been preparing and shooting the film?
Joel and Ethan had those songs in mind, yes. They, one of those songs was written by Gillian Welch and Dave Rawlings, and that, they wrote for Joel and Ethan for that story. Then there were other songs which I think all of the other ones did exist in the late 19th century, which is when these stories take place. But Joel and Ethan did change some of the words of songs to make them fit the movie. But they did all exist before I got involved.
Did the Coens, Joel and Ethan, provide you with one episode at a time to score, or did you start when you saw the final product as a complete version?
They were cutting it one episode at a time, and so I was very eager I was hoping they would cut the ones that needed the most score first, so I would have more time for those. They didn't end up doing that. So they cut them more like, I think they let the special effects drive the cutting schedule, so they tried to cut the ones that had the most special effects. For instance, Buster Scruggs, he goes to heaven at the end, so of course that's a special effect, and they cut that one first. So I really couldn't wait until they did them all. In order to give myself enough time, I waited till each episode was cut. Then I would take that one on, and then I'd take the next one on. I prefer to see an entire film before I start working, because that, without knowing how it ends, I don't really know what my goal is. In this case, I'd read the script for the last episode, but that one also actually involves a fair number of special effects. It was, it mostly takes place in a stagecoach, which is a simple set, but then much of the rest of what happens at the end is sort of created by special effects. And I like to see the end of the film before I can write the music, but I couldn't necessarily wait until then, because there really wasn't much time between the time they finished cutting that and when we started recording. So I did it, when I could. When they had an episode ready, I'd start working on it.
The film has been picked up and streamed on Netflix. In terms of distribution and also the funding, where do you see the advantages and disadvantages when compared to a studio movie?
Well, with regard to the funding, this isn't any question. It's a huge advantage. I don't think any studio, no normal studio would have made this film, and I'm not sure that even any little, the boutique studios like Focus or Sony Classics would have made this film. It's an unusual film. It's not obvious. You don't know before you make a film like this whether there's even any audience for it. If Netflix hadn't done this, I think it would have been very hard to get it done. Unfortunately, Netflix isn't dependent on opening weekend box office numbers, right?
Yes, right.
So I think that there's a whole, body of films that Netflix is going to make, I'm hoping, and that could not be made any other way. I think Roma, is another example of that. The Alfonso Cuarón movie. I think it's people who work on independent films, which I do, are always looking for some new source of money, basically, and because they're risky propositions. You never know really if there's an audience for a new idea, and that's why the big studios are just making the same old ideas over and over again.
Right.
So we're all very grateful for the presence of Netflix and Amazon and these new models for funding. It's a great thing, and clearly it's going to affect the industry in ways that we can't see. I mean, I can't anyway. Clearly, in 10 years, the whole industry is going to be different than it is now. The methods of distribution, the methods by which we are paid, the methods by which things like the Academy Awards work, all of these things are going to have to be different because of streaming. But I don't think anyone knows exactly how it's going to be different. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the industry, it has changed a lot, anyway, over the past, 10, 15 years. And, the streaming services such as Netflix and Amazon, they have provided the audience with a great amount of freedom, as to which film they can watch or which they don't want to watch. So, but it's also a very different experience when, a film is a Netflix exclusive and you stream it online. It still feels very different when compared to the full, let's say, theatrical experience.
Well, that's right. And, Netflix agreed to do some theatrical exhibition on our film, and the same with the Alfonso Cuarón movie, and that's great. I don't think they've really done that before. Maybe they have, but it's clearly not. I don't know. I shouldn't say clearly, but it's clearly not their focus, and they did that really, I think, They did that because the filmmakers want it in theaters. They want to see the large image, and when you see what people go through to shoot these films, the effort that's put into the cinematography and the set designs. I'm one of those people. I want to see it big, and I want to see all that detail on the screen. But I will also say that in the last 2 weeks, I've had so many people tell me that they saw Buster Scruggs and they saw it on Netflix, and they wouldn't have. I got to tell you, a lot of those people would not have seen it otherwise, because they don't live in a town that has an art cinema that would show a movie like that. And so it's great to have both, I guess, is how I'd have to put it.
I mean, you just mentioned the Oscars. I mean, if I may ask, you have been nominated twice. You got 2 Oscar nominations. In terms of awards, do you ever think about awards when you tackle a new project?
Well, I don't really know what you would do if you were trying to think about awards. What would I? would I write different music if I was thinking about it? You know, no, I don't think that it really. I'd be surprised if it works for anybody to think that way. I don't think that way, but I doubt that anybody thinks that way, right? I mean, there might be people who say, well, this project is a high-profile thing that would be awards fodder, but I don't know. I don't think that it really works that way. You know, I don't think people, for instance, Moonlight, which I thought was a wonderful film, but I'm sure nobody made that because they thought they were going to get an Academy Award.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it works that way, and hopefully it doesn't work that way. It doesn't for me anyway.
Hey, Carter, what's next for you? Can you disclose what you're currently working on?
Well, I've completed a film called Missing Link for Leica, which is a stop motion animation studio up in Portland, Oregon, who's done some amazing films. And this one comes out in April. And right now I'm, as soon as I finish this interview, going back to a film I'm doing with Bill Condon called The Good Liar, which stars Ian McKellen and Helen Mirren. And that is coming out, I think, the end of next year. So that'll be quite a wait for the audience. But I have to get my work done in the next couple of weeks.
Great. Carter, do you have anything else on your mind? Anything else you would like to add to our conversation?
No, not really. I think we've covered a lot. It was good.
Carter, thank you so much for taking so much time out of your busy schedule. I really loved talking to you, and I hope we get to talk soon in the future.
Okay.
I would love to, and you have a good time, and good luck with your current project, and I hope to see you soon, and I hope to talk soon. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.